My name is Mason Parker, and at 34, I built a comfortable life as a software engineer in Seattle. I thought I had moved past the pain of being the forgotten child. Then came the text that reopened every wound. Mortgages due! My mother's desperate plea arrived exactly 1 month after I cut ties. The inheritance that should have been shared went entirely to my spoiled sister Amber. Years of favoritism culminated in that moment of betrayal. Before I tell you how I responded to my desperate parents, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button while I take you through the most difficult decision of my life. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Portland was an exercise in invisibility. Our family looked perfect from the outside. My father Robert worked as an accountant. My mother Diane taught elementary school, and my sister Amber was 2 years younger than me. But inside our home, the dynamics were painfully clear from my earliest memories. Amber was the golden child. Everything about her was celebrated, from her mediocre report cards to her participation trophies. I still remember my 8th birthday, when I received a simple cake and one gift, a science book. 2 months later, Amber's birthday featured a rented bounce house, professional catering, and presents that filled half our living room. Mom explained it away. Amber needs more encouragement to feel special. Christmas mornings followed the same pattern. I would open 3 or 4 practical gifts while Amber unwrapped mountains of toys, clothes, and electronics. When I was 10, I asked my father why Santa brought Amber more presents. He awkwardly mumbled something about different needs, before quickly changing the subject. When we got sick, the contrast was stark. If I had a fever, Mom would leave medicine and water by my bed before heading to work. When Amber caught the same cold, Mom took personal days to stay home, making homemade soup and reading stories all day. I learned early to manage my own illnesses quietly. The pattern continued through our school years. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, joined the debate team, and ran track. My achievements earned brief nods of acknowledgement, if mentioned at all. Meanwhile, Amber struggled academically but received endless praise for C grades that showed improvement. Her participation in school plays warranted professional photography sessions and dinner celebrations. I kept trying to earn their approval. I mowed the lawn without being asked, helped Dad with tax season paperwork, and tutored neighborhood kids in math. The response was always the same. That's what we expect from you, Mason. You're naturally capable. Capability became my curse, the reason I deserved less attention, less celebration, less love. The college fund situation was my first true awakening. Throughout my childhood, my parents mentioned the accounts they had started for both Amber and me. Your education matters to us, they said repeatedly. Then, during my senior year of high school, Amber, who had just gotten her license, crashed her car while texting. Rather than making her face consequences, my parents dipped into my college fund to buy her a newer, safer vehicle. We'll replenish your fund before fall, Dad promised. That never happened. Instead, I received a hesitant explanation 3 months before university started. Mason, we know you'll figure it out. You've always been resourceful. Amber needs the security of knowing her education is covered. So I worked. Throughout college, I juggled 30-hour work weeks with a full course load while watching Amber drop and switch majors 3 times, all fully funded. She lived in a private apartment, while I shared a cramped dorm room with 2 other working students. When she complained about her sociology professors being too demanding, our parents sympathized. When I mentioned pulling an all-nighter to finish a project after my shift, the response was, "That's good preparation for the real world." Despite everything, I graduated with honors in computer science. My parents attended the ceremony but left early because Amber, who had come along reluctantly, complained of a headache. At dinner that night, which I paid for, conversation centered around Amber's upcoming summer trip to Europe, another gift from our parents. That night, in my cheap hotel room, I made a decision. Seattle's tech industry was booming, and I had a modest job offer there. It was 180 miles away, not so far that it seemed like an obvious escape, but far enough that weekly visits would be impractical. I accepted the position the next morning. When I told my parents, their response was predictable. "That's nice, Mason. By the way, did Amber tell you she might try photography next?" 2 weeks later, I packed everything I owned into my 10-year-old Honda and drove north, carrying equal measures of ambition and heartache. I was determined to build something they couldn't diminish or explain away. Something that was entirely mine. Seattle welcomed me with its signature rain and unexpected opportunities. My entry-level coding job at a mid-sized tech company paid just enough to afford a tiny studio apartment in an aging building. The space was minimal. But it was mine, the first environment where I didn't have to compete for attention or resources. The early career years tested my resilience. I worked overtime to prove myself, often staying until midnight debugging code or improving features nobody had asked for but would make the product better. 6 months in, my dedication caught the attention of Brian Cooper, a senior developer who became the mentor I'd never had. "You've got raw talent," Brian told me during our first lunch meeting. "But you're working like someone's chasing you. This is a marathon, not a sprint." Brian taught me more than coding best practices. He showed me how to navigate corporate politics, when to speak up in meetings, and how to negotiate for better compensation. Most importantly, he demonstrated what supportive guidance looked like, something my parents had reserved exclusively for Amber. By my 3rd year in Seattle, I had received 2 promotions and moved to a 1-bedroom apartment with actual natural light. I started building genuine friendships, mostly with coworkers who shared my interests in hiking and board games. Weekend gatherings at Rachel and Tom's place became a standing tradition. Diwali celebrations at Arnav and Priya's home introduced me to family dynamics built on mutual respect rather than favoritism. These friends became my chosen family. They celebrated my promotions with genuine enthusiasm. They helped me move apartments without complaining. They remembered my birthday without prompting. These simple acts of normal friendship felt revolutionary after my upbringing. My 5th year in Seattle marked 2 milestones. I purchased my first apartment, a modest but modern 1-bedroom in a desirable neighborhood, and I met Jessica. She was designing the user interface for a project our companies collaborated on. Her creative approach to problem-solving fascinated me, and her warm laugh made meetings I'd normally dread into highlights of my week. Our relationship developed naturally. Coffee discussions about work evolved into dinner conversations about life. Jessica grew up in California with parents who supported her artistic pursuits without reservation. Her stories about family vacations and holiday traditions sounded like fiction to me. When she first asked about my family, I gave my standard minimal response. "We're not particularly close. They live in Portland." As our relationship deepened, so did my honesty about my past. Jessica listened without judgment as I shared more details about growing up as the less favored child. "That explains a lot about your work ethic," she observed gently. "You're still trying to earn approval that should have been freely given." Meanwhile, my relationship with my family had settled into a predictable pattern of minimal contact. I called on major holidays and occasionally responded to their texts. Every conversation inevitably centered around Amber's latest drama, her 3rd career change, another failed relationship, or some perceived crisis that required parental intervention. "Amber's starting a jewelry business," Mom gushed during one Thanksgiving call. "We're helping her set up a studio in our guest room." "That's nice," I replied, not mentioning my recent major project success. "How's Dad's health been?" "Oh, he's fine. But did I tell you Amber's boyfriend moved out again? She's been so devastated we've been covering her rent until she's emotionally ready to focus on finances." These conversations left me emotionally drained. Jessica noticed the pattern, how I withdrew after family calls and threw myself into work to regain my sense of worth. "You know you don't have to keep setting yourself up for this," she suggested carefully. "It's okay to limit contact that consistently hurts you." Her permission to protect myself was revolutionary. Gradually, I reduced communication to major holidays only. My parents barely seemed to notice the change, occasionally sending group texts that were clearly meant primarily for Amber, with me included as an afterthought. By my early 30s, I had created a life rich with meaningful friendships, professional respect, financial stability, and a loving relationship. I had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy: parents who valued me equally to my sister. I had mostly made peace with that absence when the call about my grandfather came. The call about my grandfather's passing came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Despite the distance I had created from my immediate family, Grandpa Parker had remained a bright spot in my childhood memories. He was the one who taught me to fish, who listened to my science project explanations with genuine interest, and who slipped me $20 bills for being such a good kid when nobody was looking. "The funeral is Saturday," Mom said flatly. "We expect you to be there." Not, "We hope you can make it," or, "It would mean a lot if you came." Just an expectation of compliance, without acknowledgement of my busy life or the 180-mile journey. Still, this wasn't about them. It was about honoring the one family member who had seen me. I took Friday off work, and Jessica accompanied me for moral support. We checked into a hotel rather than staying with my parents, a decision that raised eyebrows but spared us additional tension. At the funeral home, I was struck by how little my parents had aged. Dad's hair had grayed at the temples, and Mom had a few more lines around her eyes. But they carried themselves with the same confident authority I remembered. Amber made a characteristically dramatic entrance 20 minutes late, her eyes conspicuously red from crying. She was escorted by a man I didn't recognize, presumably her newest boyfriend. Mom immediately rushed to comfort her while Dad guided them to seats in the front row. I received brief nods of acknowledgement before they turned their attention back to Amber's theatrical grief. The service was tasteful and mercifully brief. I shared a few words about fishing trips and science projects, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. Amber followed with a tearful speech about her special bond with Grandpa, describing moments I had never witnessed and suspected she was embellishing. Our parents nodded approvingly throughout her performance. The real shock came afterward. As immediate family, we were asked to stay for the reading of the will. I expected a simple division of Grandpa's modest assets, his house in the suburbs, some savings, perhaps his vintage fishing gear for me. I had no specific expectations beyond basic fairness. The attorney, a colleague of my father's, began reading the document in a monotone voice. I listened with half attention until a specific clause jolted me to full awareness. "To my granddaughter Amber Parker, I leave my entire estate, including my primary residence valued at $1.2 million. All investment accounts, savings, and personal property." The room went silent. I felt Jessica's hand tighten around mine as the attorney continued reading stipulations about the transfer of assets. My mind struggled to process what I'd just heard. Nothing for me? Not even Grandpa's fishing rod or the books we'd discussed. It didn't align with the man I thought I knew. When the attorney finished, I turned to my parents. "Did you know about this?" Mom avoided eye contact. Dad cleared his throat. "Your grandfather made his decisions based on what he thought was best." "What he thought was best," I repeated slowly. "Or what you convinced him was best." My father's face flushed. "Mason, this isn't the time or place. When would be a good time to discuss why I'd been completely written out of my grandfather's will? The man who took me fishing every summer? Who called me on my birthday every year, without fail?" My voice remained calm, but I felt a lifetime of suppressed hurt rising to the surface. "If you must know," Mom interjected, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "we did discuss the arrangements with your grandfather. Amber needs the financial security. You've always been able to take care of yourself. So I'm punished for being responsible? For building a career instead of bouncing between failed ventures? For not needing constant bailouts? Amber stepped forward, tears miraculously dry now. Don't be so dramatic, Mason. Grandpa knew you're doing fine with your tech job. I'm still finding my path. Finding your path for 32 years, at everyone else's expense, I responded. The argument escalated from there, with years of resentment bubbling to the surface. My father eventually admitted they had guided my grandfather's estate planning, suggesting that leaving everything to Amber was the most practical solution given my financial stability. And what about your will? I asked, a sudden realization dawning. Let me guess, everything goes to Amber there too. Their uncomfortable silence was confirmation enough. We've made arrangements that we believe are fair, Dad finally said. Amber will need more support after we're gone. You've spent my entire life telling me how capable I am, using it as an excuse to give her everything and me nothing. And now you're planning to continue that pattern even after you're gone. I stood up, suddenly feeling suffocated by the room, by the decades of systematic favoritism. Mason, you're being selfish, Mom said sharply. You've always been able to take care of yourself. That's not a justification for treating your children unequally. It's an excuse for playing favorites. I took Jessica's hand. We're leaving now. In the car, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. It wasn't about the money. I had built my own financial security. It was the final confirmation that in my family's eyes, I would always be worth less than my sister. The inheritance was just the tangible expression of a truth I had tried to deny for decades. They're never going to change, are they? I asked Jessica as we drove back to our hotel. She squeezed my hand. People only change when they want to, Mason. And they seem pretty comfortable with how things are. That night, I made the decision to completely cut ties with my family. No more holiday calls, no more brief texts. No more pretending we had a relationship worth preserving. Jessica held me as I grieved not for what I had lost, but for what I had never really had in the first place, parents who loved their children equally. A month after the funeral, just as I was settling back into my Seattle routine, Amber called. Seeing her name on my phone screen after my decision to cut contact felt like a boundary violation, but curiosity won out. What could she possibly want after inheriting everything? Mason, I need to talk to you about a business opportunity, she said without preamble. Can we meet? Against my better judgment and Jessica's concerned look, I agreed to coffee during my upcoming business trip to Portland. Part of me wanted closure, another part childishly hoped for an acknowledgement of the unfairness, perhaps even an apology. I chose a busy downtown coffee shop for our meeting, neutral territory with the benefit of public accountability. Amber arrived 20 minutes late, sporting designer sunglasses and a handbag I recognized from ads in luxury magazines. Sorry I'm late, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was terrible. She ordered a complicated specialty drink before settling across from me. So, I've been thinking about my next venture. No acknowledgement of the inheritance situation. No asking how I was doing. Just straight to her needs. I'm starting a wellness retreat center, she continued, pulling out a glossy one-page document that looked more like a magazine spread than a business plan. It's going to combine yoga, organic nutrition, and spiritual awakening experiences. Very exclusive, very now. I glanced at the paper. It contained beautiful stock photos and inspirational quotes. But no financial projections, no market analysis, nothing resembling an actual business strategy. Sounds interesting, I said neutrally. What does this have to do with me? She flashed what our parents always called her. Sunshine smile. The expression that had secured her extra desserts and deadline extensions throughout childhood. I need some investors to get it off the ground. Just a small loan to secure the property and start renovations. The inheritance covered a lot, but property in Sedona is expensive. I blinked. Sedona? Arizona? The energy vortexes there are perfect for spiritual wellness work, she explained, as if talking to a child. I found the perfect 10-acre property with mountain views. How much are you looking for? I asked, already knowing I would decline but curious about the scale of her entitlement. Just $300,000. A temporary loan until the retreat starts generating income. 6 months max. The casual way she requested a sum that had taken me years of disciplined saving to accumulate was breathtaking. That's a significant amount, Amber. What kind of business plan have you developed? What market research supports the viability of another wellness retreat in a saturated area? Her expression darkened. I thought you'd be supportive. This isn't about spreadsheets and market analysis. It's about helping people heal. Business ventures require planning, especially ones requiring hundreds of thousands in startup capital. I explained, falling into the patient-teacher role I'd adopted with her since childhood. God. You sound just like Dad with his constant lectures about financial responsibility. She huffed. I already spent almost $200,000 on securing the property option and some initial design work. I need the rest to make this happen. I nearly choked on my coffee. You've already spent $200,000? The inheritance was just finalized weeks ago. She waved dismissively. I also got a new car. My old one was nearly 3 years old. And I needed a proper wardrobe for meeting with high-end clients. The conversation deteriorated from there. When I firmly declined to invest, Amber's pleasant facade crumbled entirely. You've always been jealous of me. She spat. Always resenting the attention I got. Now you have the chance to support something meaningful I'm creating. And you're too selfish to help your own sister. This isn't about jealousy, I replied, keeping my voice steady. It's about responsible financial decisions. Your track record with business ventures isn't exactly promising. Just because you got lucky with your computer job doesn't make you better than me. She shot back. Some of us are trying to make a difference in the world, not just type code all day. I stood up, leaving my half-finished coffee on the table. I think we're done here. Good luck with your retreat. That evening, scrolling through social media in my hotel room, I discovered Amber had already posted photos of her new vacation property in Sedona and her investment in self-care. A $15,000 hot tub. No mention of a wellness retreat. The inheritance was being burned through at record speed. When I returned to Seattle, I received a call from my parents. I almost didn't answer, but decided one final conversation might provide the closure I needed. We understand you refused to help your sister with her new business. Mom began without greeting. Her business plan consisted of a mood board and vague promises. I replied. That's not something I'm comfortable investing in. She's trying to find her purpose, Dad countered. We've always encouraged her creativity. At everyone else's expense, I added. Including Grandpa's entire estate, apparently. The conversation circled familiar territory until Mom said something that crystallized everything. You know, Mason, we're not getting any younger. Our retirement accounts took a hit in the last market downturn. We always thought we could count on you to help if we needed it. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for Amber's business, but laying groundwork for their own future requests. I was the responsible son, the backup plan. The safety net for a family that had consistently treated me as an afterthought. Let me make something clear, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not Amber's investor. I'm the son you've consistently deprioritized for 34 years. That's not fair. Mom protested. We've always been proud of you. Proud when it costs nothing. Proud when it requires no sacrifice or support on your part. Proud from a distance while you focus your actual attention, affection, and resources on Amber. After a lengthy silence, Dad spoke. Son, sometimes you need to be the bigger person. Family is family. I've been the bigger person my entire life, I replied. I'm done. That night, with Jessica's support, I wrote a formal letter to my parents and Amber. I explained that I would no longer provide financial support of any kind, now or in the future. I outlined the pattern of favoritism that had defined my childhood and continued into adulthood. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved. I ended by wishing them well and asking for no further contact. Jessica held me after I sent the email. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "That couldn't have been easy." "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "it was the easiest thing I've done in years." I blocked their numbers and social media accounts the next morning. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. 6 months of blissful no-contact living gave me space to focus on things that actually nourished my spirit. My career continued to thrive. I received a substantial promotion to technical director, overseeing a team of 15 developers. Jessica and I moved in together, merging our lives with the easy compatibility that had characterized our relationship from the start. On quiet Sunday mornings, we began tentatively discussing marriage. Not in pressured ultimatums, but in gentle what-ifs that made the future seem bright with possibility. "I think you'd look handsome in navy blue for a wedding," she'd muse while we shared coffee on our balcony. "Fall in Washington would make for beautiful photos," I'd suggest, watching her eyes light up at the thought. I still attended therapy weekly, working through the lingering effects of my upbringing. Conditional love creates conditional self-worth, my therapist explained. "We're rewiring those connections in your brain." Slowly, I was learning to value myself without external validation. Then came the text that shattered my peace. "Mortgage is due." I stared at my mother's message, my coffee growing cold in my hand. After 6 months of respecting my boundaries, this was how she chose to break the silence? No apology. No acknowledgement, just a financial demand disguised as a cry for help. More messages followed in quick succession. "We're going to lose the house. Your father's heart can't take this stress. Please, Mason, we need help. Why aren't you answering? After everything we've done for you." That last one made me laugh bitterly. What exactly had they done for me that wasn't the basic requirement of parenthood? Even those obligations they had fulfilled unequally. I showed the messages to Jessica, who frowned deeply. "They're not even pretending this is about reconnecting. It's just about money." "Classic," I agreed, putting my phone away without responding. 2 days later, my college friend Taylor, who still lived in Portland, called me. "Have you heard what's happening with your family?" she asked tentatively. "They texted asking for money, if that's what you mean." "It's worse than that," Taylor explained. "From what I've heard through mutual connections, Amber's wellness retreat venture collapsed spectacularly. She never even got the proper permits before starting construction. Your parents remortgaged their paid-off house to fund it, against their financial advisor's explicit advice." I closed my eyes, the pieces falling into place. "Let me guess, Amber's nowhere to be found. She posted Instagram stories from Barcelona last week. Apparently, she's traveling through Europe with some yoga instructor she met at a retreat. Meanwhile, your parents are 3 months behind on their new mortgage payments." The story continued to unfold through various channels over the next week. My parents had taken out a $500,000 mortgage on their home to fund Amber's business and cover some of her personal debts. When the business failed, Amber had promised to help with payments, then promptly disappeared overseas. Now the bank was threatening foreclosure. My mother's messages became increasingly desperate, alternating between guilt trips. "How can you abandon your family?" and anger. "After everything we sacrificed for you." My father, who had rarely contacted me directly even before the estrangement, called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that started formally but deteriorated into emotional pleas. The final escalation came when he called my office line, a number they shouldn't have had access to. "Mason, we need $70,000 to bring the mortgage current and stop the foreclosure process," he said without preamble when I reluctantly answered. "We can set up a payment plan to pay you back." "Dad," I made it very clear 6 months ago that I wouldn't be providing financial support. I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite being ambushed at work. This is different. This is an emergency. We could be homeless. Where's Amber? It's her failed business that created this situation. A pause. You know your sister isn't reliable with financial matters. That's why we've always counted on you. There it was again, the admission that they'd always seen me as the responsible one, the backup plan, while continuing to reward Amber with attention, affection, and resources. They weren't calling because they'd had a change of heart about how they treated me. They were calling because their preferred child had failed them, and they needed their backup option. Have you considered selling the house and downsizing? I asked practically. A couple your age doesn't need a 4-bedroom home anymore. This is our family home. He protested. Where would we put all our things? Where would Amber stay when she comes back? Always Amber. Even facing homelessness. Their primary concern was her comfort. I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said finally. But I can't help. That night I barely slept. Jessica found me at 3 a.m. staring out our living room window at Seattle's glittering skyline. You're thinking about helping them, aren't you? She asked softly, joining me on the couch. I'm thinking about whether I'm a terrible person for not helping, I admitted. They could lose their home. A home they remortgaged to fund Amber's latest whim. After giving her an entire inheritance that should have been shared with you. Jessica pointed out. You're not responsible for the consequences of their choices, Mason. But they're still my parents. Being your parents doesn't entitle them to your money, especially when they've made it clear they see you as an ATM, not a son they value equally. I spoke with my therapist the next day in an emergency session. Guilt is not the same as obligation, she reminded me. You can feel guilt without being required to act on it. As the day progressed, I found clarity emerging from the emotional fog. My parents had made their choice, repeatedly, consistently for decades. They had chosen Amber at every turn. They had chosen to refinance their home for her business without due diligence. They had chosen to enable her irresponsibility while taking my responsibility for granted. By morning, I knew my answer. I unblocked my mother's number long enough to send a single text. You chose her, ask her. Then I blocked the number again, turned off my phone, and took the day off work. Jessica and I went hiking in the mountains, where cell service couldn't reach us, and the perspective of nature reminded me how small human dramas really are. The fallout was swift and predictable. Within days, extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years began calling and messaging. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, left a scathing voicemail about family obligation and turning your back on the people who raised you. My father's brother Steve texted that I was heartless for not helping my parents in their time of need. These flying monkeys, a term my therapist used for people recruited to fight others' battles, came in waves. Most had incomplete or incorrect information. Believing I was refusing to help my parents through some temporary hardship rather than understanding the decades of context, I decided to respond to one person, my cousin Mark, who had always been kind to me at family gatherings. I wrote him a detailed email explaining the pattern of favoritism, the inheritance situation, and the current mortgage crisis. I didn't expect him to take my side, but I hoped he might at least understand my position. To my surprise, Mark called me after reading the email. I had no idea it was this bad, he admitted. Aunt Diane always portrayed you as the successful one who didn't need anything and Amber as the struggling artist who needed support. I never realized how much they enabled her at your expense. Mark became an unexpected ally, quietly correcting misinformation among other family members. Gradually, a few others reached out with messages of support or at least understanding. My father's sister Elaine called to say she'd always noticed the disparity in how we were treated but hadn't felt it was her place to interfere. Your grandfather knew, too, she revealed, dropping a bombshell that sent me reeling. He actually wanted to split everything equally, but your parents convinced him Amber needed the inheritance more. He wasn't in the best mental state near the end, and they wore him down. This confirmation of what I had suspected brought a strange mix of vindication and fresh pain. The grandfather who had seen me had tried to be fair, only to have his intentions manipulated by my parents. The situation escalated beyond phone calls when my parents showed up at my workplace unannounced. Security called me to the lobby, where I found them looking disheveled and desperate. My father had lost weight. My mother's hair was unkempt. They had driven 3 hours from Portland without warning. "Sir, these people claim to be your parents," the security guard explained uncomfortably. "They don't have an appointment but insist on seeing you." I took a deep breath. "I'm not available to meet with them. Please escort them out of the building." "Mason, please." My mother's voice cracked. "We drove all this way. You should have called first," I replied calmly. "I've been clear about my boundaries." As security guided them toward the exit, my father called out, "We're going to lose everything. Is that what you want?" I didn't respond. Back in my office, my hands shook as I called Jessica. Then my therapist. Both affirmed that I had handled the situation appropriately. Boundary violations escalate when the initial boundaries are effective, my therapist explained. This is actually a sign you're doing the right thing, even though it feels terrible. A week later, I received a certified letter from an attorney claiming to represent my parents. The letter suggested I might have a filial responsibility to assist with their housing crisis. A quick consultation with my own attorney confirmed what I suspected. No such legal obligation existed in our state. My lawyer sent a cease and desist letter, warning against further harassment at my workplace or home. Throughout this storm, Jessica remained my steadfast support. "I'm amazed by your strength," she told me one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Most people would have caved under this kind of pressure." "I spent my whole life caving," I replied, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "I always stepped aside so Amber could have the spotlight. I always did without so she could have more. I'm finally standing up for myself, and it feels right despite being difficult." My friend and mentor Brian shared a similar story from his own life during a lunch break. "My parents favored my brother for years. When I finally drew the line, they unleashed the entire extended family on me. It was hell for 6 months, but then something interesting happened. They adjusted. When they realized the emotional manipulation wouldn't work anymore, they found other solutions." "You think my parents will adjust?" I asked skeptically. Brian shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But you will have protected your dignity either way." As weeks passed, the pressure campaign gradually subsided. The holidays arrived, my first completely estranged from my family of origin. Jessica and I hosted a chosen family Thanksgiving with friends, creating new traditions built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I felt moments of sadness for what I had never had, but they were overshadowed by gratitude for what I had built. Through mutual connections, I learned my parents had begun selling luxury items to make mortgage payments. My mother's jewelry collection, my father's vintage car. Amber had returned briefly from Europe, stayed for 2 weeks, then left again after some major argument. They had downsized some aspects of their lifestyle, but were still fighting to keep their house. Part of me felt vindicated that they were finally facing consequences for their choices. A smaller part felt sorrow for their situation, despite everything. The complexity of these emotions became part of my therapy work, learning that compassion didn't require sacrifice, that understanding didn't mandate rescue. As the months passed, my confidence in my decision strengthened. The guilt diminished, replaced by a growing sense of peace. I was breaking a generational pattern of enabling and codependency. I was establishing that love without respect isn't really love at all. The hardest part about boundaries, my therapist explained during one particularly insightful session, is that they often hurt in the short term. But without them, we suffer indefinitely. By the 1-year anniversary of cutting contact, I felt more myself than I ever had before. The crisis had forced me to define my values and live by them, even when doing so was painful. Jessica and I were actively planning our wedding, creating a family based on equality and mutual support. Perhaps most surprisingly, I received a letter from my father, not asking for money, but acknowledging, in his limited way, some awareness of the past unfairness. "I know we haven't always been as balanced in our approach to you and your sister," he wrote. "That wasn't intentional, but I can see how it affected you." It wasn't a full apology or a complete recognition of the pattern that had defined our family. But it was something, a crack in the wall of denial they had maintained for decades. I chose not to respond but kept the letter as a small confirmation that my boundaries had created at least some reflection. Standing firm had cost me my family of origin but had preserved something far more valuable, my self-respect. 1 year after receiving that desperate "mortgage is due" text, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The peaceful existence I had built remained intact, strengthened by the boundaries I had maintained despite immense pressure. Through mutual friends, I learned my parents had finally accepted reality and downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment. The foreclosure had been avoided through a short sale of their house. They were managing financially, not comfortably, but adequately. Amber had returned from Europe and was apparently working part-time at a yoga studio while living in a small apartment of her own. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was facing the natural consequences of her choices without being rescued. Meanwhile, Jessica and I had celebrated our engagement with a small party attended by the people who truly supported us. We were planning an autumn wedding in the Washington Mountains, with golden leaves and crisp air creating a perfect backdrop for our new beginning. My weekly therapy sessions had shifted from crisis management to deeper healing. Family patterns run deep, my therapist explained during one session. You're not just changing your relationship with your parents, you're changing how you relate to yourself and how you'll relate to your own children someday. The thought of having children had once terrified me. How could I be a good parent when my only model had been so fundamentally flawed? But through therapy and honest conversations with Jessica, I began to see that awareness was the first step toward breaking the cycle. I knew exactly what not to do, never to favor one child over another, never to make love conditional on achievement, never to use one child as a backup plan for another's failures. "You'll be an amazing father," Jessica told me one evening as we watched the sunset from our balcony. "You know the pain of being unseen. You'll make sure our children always feel equally valued." The prospect of creating a family based on fairness and unconditional love became a healing vision for my future. Surprisingly, my relationship with some extended family members improved after the estrangement from my parents. My Uncle James, my father's younger brother who had always been somewhat distant, reached out after hearing about the situation from Mark. We began meeting monthly for lunch when his consulting work brought him to Seattle. "Your father and I were raised with the same skewed ideas about parenting," James explained during one of these lunches. "Our father believed in having a backup child and a favorite child. It was a strange Depression-era mentality about risk management. I never had kids partly because I feared I'd repeat that pattern without realizing it. These conversations helped me understand that my parents' dysfunction hadn't emerged from nowhere, it had roots in their own upbringing. This didn't excuse their behavior but provided context that helped me process my experiences with more compassion. In April, I received a formal letter from my father. Unlike his previous attempt at reconciliation, this one acknowledged specific instances of unfairness, using my college fund for Amber's car, minimizing my achievements while celebrating her minimal efforts, and influencing my grandfather's will. He stopped short of a full apology, writing instead that, "We did what we thought was right at the time, based on our understanding of each of your needs." I didn't respond to this letter either, but I shared it with my therapist. "This represents progress on his part," she noted. But it's still centered on their perspective rather than the impact of their actions on you. You're not obligated to re-engage based on partial recognition. I decided to maintain the no-contact boundary while acknowledging that the letter represented growth on my father's part. Forgiveness was becoming possible, even without reconciliation. I could release the anger without resuming a relationship that had proven consistently harmful. Jessica and I married in September, surrounded by people who truly celebrated our happiness. Brian served as my best man, delivering a toast that acknowledged the family I had created for myself in the absence of healthy origin relationships. There were no empty seats where parents should have been, just friends who had shown up consistently with love and support. Our honeymoon in New Zealand gave us 2 weeks of adventure and connection, strengthening the foundation of our marriage. Upon returning, we began seriously discussing starting a family of our own. What scares you most about becoming a parent? Jessica asked one evening as we browsed houses in family-friendly neighborhoods. That I'll unconsciously recreate patterns from my childhood, I admitted. That I'll find myself treating one child differently without even realizing it. The fact that you're aware of that possibility makes it less likely, she reassured me. And I'll be there to point it out if I ever see it happening. Her confidence in me, combined with the work I'd done in therapy, gradually eased my fears. We began the process of looking for a house with enough bedrooms for the family we hoped to create. As the second anniversary of my estrangement approached, I reflected on everything that had changed. The most profound shift wasn't external but internal. I no longer defined my worth through others' validation. I had learned that healthy love doesn't demand self-sacrifice or one-sided compromise. I understood that maintaining boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary for authentic relationships. The family saying, "Blood is thicker than water," had been used against me repeatedly during the estrangement. But I had discovered a deeper truth: family isn't who's obligated to love you, but who chooses to love you fairly. The bonds we create intentionally often prove stronger than those we inherit by chance. My journey from approval-seeking child to boundary-setting adult had been painful but necessary. In choosing myself, my dignity, my financial security, my emotional health, I hadn't become selfish. I had become whole. The greatest gift you can give yourself, my therapist had told me in one of our final regular sessions, is permission to be treated with respect. Not just by others, but by yourself. I carried these lessons into each day, each interaction, each decision about my future. The inheritance I had been denied financially had been replaced by something far more valuable, the inheritance of self-worth that couldn't be taken away. So what about you? Have you ever had to cut ties with family for your own well-being? Or have you stayed in difficult family relationships because of obligation? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar decisions. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and finding peace. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we create matters more than the family we're born into.